Rita Morgan is the safest place Dexter Morgan ever finds, and that safety is exactly what puts her in the most danger. On paper, she looks like a side character, a nice, slightly fragile single mom in Miami, trying to rebuild a life after an abusive husband and a long, humiliating custody battle. But if Dexter's whole existence is about keeping the mask in place, Rita is not just his girlfriend. She is the structural solution to his biggest problem: how to walk into Miami Metro homicide every morning, analyze blood for a living, and still convince everyone that he is harmless. This is the story of the woman who makes a monster look safe, and of how the series quietly shows you that she pays for that every step of the way. Dexter chooses Rita very deliberately. He tells us that her trauma, her exhaustion, her low expectations make her perfect because she will not ask too many questions when he disappears at odd hours. While she is focused on getting Astor and Cody away from Paul, he is using her home as an alibi, her schedule as cover, her kindness as camouflage. Every date night, every school event, every soft domestic moment is also a line in his defense file. And when you lay them all out together, her history with Paul, her mother's constant criticism, Dexter's calculated kindness, you start to see a long, unbroken chain of people using Rita as a shield. Paul uses her as a punching bag and a place to stash his addictions. Her mother uses her as proof that Rita is weak and dependent. Dexter uses her as evidence that he cannot possibly be what Doakes suspects, what LaGuerta half remembers, what the Bay Harbor butcher profile almost describes. We are going to move slowly through that arc, from those early seasons where Rita is just trying to believe that a gentle man has finally walked into her life, to the season where she marries him, has a baby with him, and is murdered at the exact height of her hope. Along the way, every moment Dexter almost gets caught is quietly filtered through her world. The ice truck killer leaving bodies while she plans a normal future. Doakes circling Dexter while Rita worries about a supposed drug addiction. Trinity closing in just as she thinks the chaos is finally ending. Settle in, get comfortable. Let's follow the calm surface of Rita's story, the quiet kitchen scenes and bedtime routines, with a growing awareness that she is always standing just off screen from the blast radius of Dexter's double life. If Rita is the thing that keeps Dexter from getting caught, what keeps Rita from ever really being seen? And that distance, that sense that Rita is always just off to the side of the real explosion, is not an accident. It is baked into the way Dexter Morgan chooses her, names her value, and files her away as a solution long before he ever lets her be a person. In the first season, he tells us plainly why she is perfect. Rita is too damaged from Paul, too exhausted by custody battles and financial strain, too numb from years of domestic violence to want sex or demand much from him. He does not say this cruelly. He says it clinically, almost gently, like a man describing the properties of a tool he is about to use. For Dexter, her trauma is not a wound. It is an asset. Watch how the series frames that realization. Warm yellow light in a small Miami kitchen, Astor and Cody moving in the background, and seasons trying to name. The asymmetry is brutal. For Dexter, Rita is an answer to a logistical problem. Appear normal, deflect suspicion, have somewhere to be when a body turns up. For Rita, Dexter is a miracle. A man who does not yell, does not hit, does not storm out drunk. Someone who is patient with the kids, who listens, who seems endlessly understanding when she cannot or will not be sexual with him. You start to see how the same behavior reads as mercy to her and strategy to him. And when you lay them all out together, the dinners, the school pickups, the quiet nights on the couch, you start to see another pattern. Every gesture that makes Dexter look human to the outside world also deepens Rita's emotional investment. Every time he tucks Cody in, every time he reassures Astor, every time he stands in that yellow kitchen and smiles, he is tightening the net that keeps her in place as his cover. So, the central tension settles in quietly. The more Rita believes she has finally found stability, the more firmly she becomes cemented as Dexter's alibi, not his partner. Settle in, get comfortable, because as we are going to see, the closer Dexter gets to being caught, the more the series leans on Rita's faith in him to hold the mask together just a little bit longer. To understand why Rita is the perfect cover, we are going to step back to the years before Dexter ever walks into her life, because Dexter Morgan does not invent Rita's vulnerability. He just learns how to live inside a pattern that is already there. Rita's marriage to Paul is the blunt version of that pattern. Addiction, physical abuse, police reports that never quite lead to safety. Every night, she is waiting for the sound of his car, the slam of the door, the way the air in the house changes when a drunk, angry man decides the world has wronged him, and her body is the way to balance the scales. The bruises, the broken promises, the nights in the hospital or at Miami Metro, homicide, filing complaints that will not hold him forever. That is her early adult life, a long season of fear. Then there is her mother, who never throws a punch but still lands damage. Judgmental, controlling, always ready with a cutting remark about Rita's choices, her parenting, her failure to keep a man. Where Paul uses fists to tell Rita she is worthless, her mother uses words, raised eyebrows, and the constant implication that whatever has gone wrong is, ultimately, Rita's fault. It is abuse in softer packaging, but the message is the same. You do not trust your own perception. You trust ours. This is the story of someone trained in the classic cycle of abuse. Tension building as Paul gets restless, or her mother starts needling. The incident, whether it is a shove into a wall or a public humiliation at the dinner table. The reconciliation, with flowers, apologies, or a rare, approving smile. The calm, which never feels like peace so much as the quiet part of a storm you know will. Over time, you start to see how chaos becomes proof that you matter, because at least someone is reacting to you. Dexter does not step in as the new incident. He steps in as the calm. On the surface, he is gentle, patient, endlessly understanding of her baggage. But that calm is not neutral. It is controlling. His disappearances, his invented addictions, his half-truths about work, all keep Rita dependent on his version without ever realizing she is in. That protection has a cost. It just doesn't look like the kind of gaslighting we are used to naming. In this story, no one is standing in the kitchen screaming that Rita is crazy. Instead, Dexter Morgan specializes in the quietest kind of gaslighting. The half-truth offered at exactly the right moment. The missing detail that would let her connect the dots. The calm explanation that gives her just enough to doubt her own instincts and then feel guilty for having them in the first place. Early on, the pattern is almost gentle. Dexter disappears at odd hours, his phone off, his voicemail full. When he finally calls back, it is always the same tone, the same steady cadence. A late-night case at Miami Metro homicide, a sudden blood workup, a body that just came in. The words are vague, but plausible, and every time you watch Rita choose the safer interpretation. Because the alternative is that the first good man she has trusted since Paul is lying to her face. He comes home with unexplained injuries, a cut on his cheek, a bruise on his ribs. Dexter shrugs and blames a crime scene, a slip with glass, some clumsy moment at work. She could push harder. She does not. He is good with the kids. He folds laundry. He remembers to pick up juice boxes. In Rita's mind, that domestic steadiness becomes evidence that her fleeting suspicions must be unfair, even paranoid. But that is not the whole story, because the show keeps framing these conversations in a way that tells you something is wrong, even when Rita cannot see it. She is usually in warm domestic spaces, bathed in soft light, surrounded by toys, dishes, the slow clutter of a life she is trying to rebuild. Dexter, by contrast, is often half in shadow, standing in a doorway, framed on the threshold between two lives. 1 foot in the kitchen, 1 foot in the dark. When you lay them all out together, the missed calls, the late nights, the vague work emergencies, the unexplained blood, you start to see a pattern where Rita's reality is constantly edited by everyone around her. Her mother tells her she overreacts. Paul insists Dexter set him up, and she is hysterical for even considering it. Dexter calmly denies, redirects, reassures, every moment nudges her a few inches further away from her own perception. And she has been primed for this. Years of Paul's abuse, years of being told that her fear was drama and her anger was irrational, have already taught her that other people's stories are safer than her own. So when Dexter offers his version of events, softly, consistently, never raising his voice, Rita does what she has been trained to do. She believes the man who sounds reasonable. Settle in, get comfortable, because as the series moves forward, this quiet erosion of her instincts is what will keep her standing right next to Dexter's mask at the exact moments it most deserves to crack. And that is exactly where the show starts to use her for something colder than comfort. Because once Rita is standing next to Dexter's mask, the series quietly turns her house into a kind of seismic monitor. Every time the ground shifts in Dexter's world, we are going to feel the aftershock in her kitchen. Watch the pattern. Dexter survives a close call at Miami Metro homicide, or slips away from a kill that almost goes wrong, and then, almost reflexively, the next scene is Dexter walking through Rita's front door. Danger, cut, domestic reset. You start to see it as early as season. Dexter is chasing you call. She is not only speaking as a hurt partner, she is echoing the question in your own head as you watch Dexter slip out of another interrogation. Another tale, another near miss. Her suspicion is domestic, but the anxiety underneath it belongs to the audience. We know he was not at an NA meeting. We know he was not working late. The line between her emotional confusion and our fear of his exposure gets thinner every season. This is the story of how the show keeps reminding you what Dexter stands to lose. Crime scene. Investigation. Then, Rita's couch, Rita's table, Rita's plans for a normal weekend. When you lay them all out together, the pattern stops feeling accidental and starts to look like design. Her presence is the soft frame around every hard escalation and risk, the human face attached to the abstract idea of stakes. And the stranger the tension gets, the more the camera returns to her. Doakes closes in. Cut to Rita planning a family vacation. The Bay Harbor butcher case narrows toward someone with Dexter's exact profile. Cut to Rita talking about marriage, about a future. She becomes a kind of human pressure gauge, the higher the reading in Dexter's secret life. The more insistently the series shows you the life he is endangering, it works beautifully for suspense. It also means that, piece by piece, Rita is being reduced to a symbol of risk more than a fully autonomous character, a shift that will make her eventual fate feel less like a twist and more like an awful inevitability the show has been quietly steering us toward. And that brings us to the quieter horror sitting underneath all of this. Rita as a kind of safe harbor that never asks for a map. Rita's core dream is almost aggressively ordinary. She wants a life where the rent is paid on time, the kids' backpacks are by the door, and the only yelling that happens in the house is over a board game. After Paul, after court dates and bruises and police at the door. A boring Tuesday night in the kitchen with Dexter Morgan doing the dishes is not just pleasant. It feels like survival. This is the story of someone whose nervous system has been trained to treat calm as the highest possible good. Trauma survivors often learn very efficiently that truth is dangerous. Telling the truth about Paul meant escalating fights, custody threats, a mother who blamed her. So the lesson becomes simple: stability over clarity, every time. If things look okay on the surface, do not go looking for the crack in the wall. For Dexter, that coping mechanism is not just convenient, it is strategic. He picks Rita because she is kind, yes, but also because she is exhausted. She is already fighting her ex-husband, her finances, her own self-doubt. We are going to see, over and over, how that exhaustion lowers the bar for what counts as good enough. Dexter does not have to be perfect. He just has to be better than Paul and reliably present. So, when he disappears at odd hours, the explanation is work at Miami Metro Homicide. When he comes home distant, the explanation becomes a vague addiction that she is proud to help him conquer. When you lay them all out together, her quick acceptance of his excuses, her gratitude for small gestures like fixing a door or showing up to a school event, her reluctance to press when he clearly wants to change the subject, you start to see a pattern that is not naivety so much as self-protection. Because pushing too hard has never gone well for Rita. Pushing Paul, that once kept Rita alive, now keep her in the dark. Settle in. Get comfortable, because as the series goes on, those same instincts will guide her straight toward the one threat she cannot see coming. Because once you notice it with Dexter, you start to see it everywhere. Rita is not just living with one man who edits reality for her. She is surrounded by people who treat the truth like something fragile, something she cannot quite be trusted to hold. Her mother does it first. In those early visits, sitting at Rita's kitchen table, you can feel the judgment humming under every polite comment. The way she talks about Paul, about Rita's choices, about what a real family should look like, is full of things she does not say out loud. She hints. She implies. She pulls Astor aside in the driveway to have little talks Rita is not invited into, as if the children are old enough for hard truths, but their own mother is not. Paul does it in a louder way. His lies are obvious, but they are still lies. The promises that he is clean now, the stories he tells the kids about why he was gone, the way he insists, even to Rita's face, that Dexter framed him, while everyone around her gently steers the conversation away. There is that emblematic driveway scene where Paul and Dexter collide, voices low, tempers high, and Rita steps out just in time to see their mouths stop moving. The subject changes instantly. She is told it is under control. And Dexter, of course, is the quiet center of it. This is the story of a man who walks into Miami Metro Homicide every morning with a smile and then comes home to Rita with the same mask. The late nights at work, the carefully constructed narrative of addiction that explains the missing hours without ever inviting questions about what he is really doing. When you lay them all out together, every excuse, every softened explanation, every time he says it's nothing, don't worry, you start to see how completely her reality has been curated for her. Even the people who care about her join in. Friends who know more about Paul's relapses than they admit. Colleagues who exchange quick glances over her head when she talks about the future. Deborah, who knows there is something off about her brother long before she can name it, but still bites back her concerns when Rita is planning a wedding and a nursery. The pattern is always the same: hushed conversations in driveways. Quick subject changes when Rita walks into a room, truths trimmed down to a level that will not upset her. We're going to map this as more than just a collection of small deceptions, because what it teaches Rita over time is that she is always the last to know, and that this is simply how life works. Every omission about Paul's behavior, every silence about Dexter's past, every withheld concern about her choices quietly feeds the same insecurity. If something was really important, someone would tell her. So if they are not telling her, it must not be that bad. And so by the time Dexter Morgan's lies shift from emotional to life or death, Rita has already been conditioned to accept a world where she never has the full story. Now, let's follow what happens when that familiar, almost comforting fog of half-truths collides with a killer who depends on it to stay hidden. And that fog becomes most dangerous in the one moment the series wants you to read as pure clarity, the proposal. By the time, imagine, because she has already decided he is the stable one. The series shows you this in the smallest details. Dexter's internal monologue frames the proposal like solving a problem. He runs through variables, weighs risks, calculates how a wife and a mortgage and a new baby will make him look permanently settled. This is the story of a predator fortifying his camouflage, not a man overwhelmed by feeling. And yet, on the surface, every element is framed as romance. Soft lighting, warm music, close-ups of Rita's face as she realizes what is happening. When you lay them all out together, the ring, the timing right after escalating suspicion, the way Dexter thinks about it in voiceover, you start to see two completely different scenes happening at once. In Dexter's head, it is a strategic escalation. On Rita's side of the table, it is the culmination of years of survival. Because for Rita, this is not logistics. This is validation. After Paul, after being told in 100 ways that she is too damaged, too burdened with kids, too much work, the idea that someone as good as Dexter Morgan wants to marry her feels like proof that she is finally worthy of stability. She hears commitment where he is thinking cover. She feels safe at the exact moment he is making sure he will always have somewhere safe to hide. The show leans into that dissonance. Dexter's voiceover stays cool, almost clinical, while the visuals invite you to relax, to settle in, get comfortable with the idea that this is a happy turning point. And because we care about Rita, we want to believe the version she is living in. That is the quiet cruelty of this moment. The proposal cements Rita's investment. She doubles down emotionally, tying her future and her children's future to Dexter, just as he is doubling down strategically, binding his double life even tighter to hers. And once those lines are crossed, the cost of seeing him clearly becomes almost unthinkable. Now, let's follow what happens when that ring on her finger starts to pull her directly into the blast radius of his secrets. That ring is not just jewelry for Rita, it is a thesis statement about what her life is finally allowed to become. In her mind, this is the moment the chaos stops and the real story starts, the one where she is no longer reacting to men who hurt her, but actively building a future with a man who, as far as she can see, shows up. She imagines a stable home that stays quiet at night, co-parenting with someone who remembers school events, fixes broken cabinets, and actually comes back when he says he will. Maybe another baby after Harrison, once they catch their breath. The old bruises, the custody battles with Paul, the way her mother made her feel small in her own kitchen, those are supposed to fade into background noise, like a bad season you barely mention anymore. This is the story of a survivor who thinks she has finally found the proof that she made it out. We are going to sit with that, because for a lot of people who have lived through abuse, the fantasy of starting over with a good partner is not just romantic. It is evidence. If they can build a calm, loving family, then the past was a detour, not a definition. The new marriage becomes a verdict. I am not broken. I chose better this time. So every domestic moment with Dexter Morgan starts doing double duty. When they paint the new house, you can almost feel Rita rewriting herself with each brushstroke, not the woman who passed with someone safe enough to dream next to. When you lay them all out together, the smiles, the to-do lists on the fridge, the quiet scenes of Rita folding baby clothes, you start to see how much emotional weight she loads onto this second chance. Every moment is a small referendum on whether she escaped her past, and every time Dexter walks through the door on time, the verdict seems to be yes. Now, let's place that against the other half of the frame. Because the series keeps cutting between this fragile fantasy and the machinery of Dexter's double life, Miami Metro homicide, closing in on the Bay Harbor butcher, Doakes circling, Trinity looming. Every time he almost gets caught, the camera can return to Rita's careful little world and silently remind you what will shatter if the mask slips. And the more detailed and hopeful her vision becomes, the baby names, the mortgage, the anniversary plans, the more brutal it will be when we have to confront how little of it was ever grounded in the reality of who she actually married. And right on cue, the universe keeps testing how thin that vision really is. We're going to move through a few of Dexter Morgan's closest calls, not from the vantage point of Miami Metro homicide, but from the quiet echo they leave in Rita's kitchen, in her driveway, in the way she answers the phone. Because every spike in his danger level sends out a little shockwave, and it almost always lands on her. Season 1. The ice truck killer has taken Deb. The investigation is spiraling, and Dexter is staying out later, disappearing into the night under the cover of work. He almost exposes himself with how personally he's invested, how much he knows that he should not know. When you lay them all out together, you start to see how the show cuts from those high-tension scenes straight back to Rita. Dexter arrives at her house late, still humming with adrenaline, and suddenly he is overly tender, overly present, promising he will help with Paul, with the custody battle, with anything she needs. Rita gives him this small, searching look, a flicker of doubt, a question that almost forms. Where were you, really? Then she remembers the story she has been told about his demons, about his supposed addiction. And you can watch the doubt fold itself back into gratitude. She forces a smile instead. She apologizes for even almost asking. Later, when Doakes has started tailing Dexter in Season 2, when the Bay Harbor butcher case is tightening around the marina, Dexter comes home to Rita jumpy and distracted. He has just avoided being seen at a crime scene he created. She has just fielded another call from Paul's lawyer. Two different kinds of threat, colliding in the same living room. Dexter overcorrects. He offers to take the kids to the park, to cook dinner, to talk about their future. It looks like growth. It is actually containment. Rita senses something off. His eyes are somewhere else for a second too long. His voice catches when she mentions the FBI. There is a half-formed, Dexter, is there something you're not telling me, that dies halfway out of her mouth when he reaches for her hand. The mask tightens, the moment passes. By the time we reach Trinity, the pattern is fully established. A close call with Lundy and Deb here. A near discovery of the blood slides there, and each time Dexter returns to Rita with a new intensity. He is suddenly very invested in the house, the baby, the wedding plans. This is the story of a man trying to anchor himself to normalcy, right after almost being dragged into the light. For Rita, those are the days completely, and this is where something very quiet and very sad begins to happen. On the surface, it finally looks like Rita has what she always deserved, a partner who shows up, listens, and takes some of the weight off her shoulders. Dexter encourages her to stand up to Paul. He is the calm voice on the phone when Paul is shouting in the background. He goes to court with her, backs her up when she fights for full custody, offers to take Astor and Cody so she can breathe for a moment. In every crisis, he is the one person who does not raise his voice, who does not slam a door, who does not make her feel small. But that is not the whole story. Because every one of those supportive gestures also fits perfectly into Dexter Morgan's needs. Keeping Paul away is not just about Rita's safety. It is about eliminating a volatile, suspicious man who already senses that Dexter framed him. Helping with the kids is not only kindness, it is how Dexter builds a believable mask of domestic normalcy that keeps Miami Metro Homicide from ever questioning why he is never really alone. We are going to look at these moments as more than isolated kindnesses. When you lay them all out together, you start to see a pattern. Dexter nudges Rita toward choices that make his double life smoother, encouraging a move to the suburbs that gives him a quieter base of operations, supporting schedule changes that keep her busy while he is out on the boat, framing his late nights as overwork, so she will accept his absences as sacrifice rather than secrecy. There is a dry irony in how often he sells these changes as being for her benefit. A safer neighborhood, a better school district, more stability for the new baby. On paper, nothing is wrong. Yet with every decision, her world becomes more centered around Dexter's routines, Dexter's comfort, Dexter's need to vanish without questions. This is the story of control that does not look like control. After Paul's overt violence, after a mother who blamed her for staying, Rita is primed to welcome any version of support that feels steady and non-threatening. So when Dexter gently steers, she experiences it as relief. Someone else is finally taking charge, making plans, handling the hard parts. But the cost is invisible to her. The more she leans on him, the narrower her options become. Her social life shrinks, her independence softens, and the architecture of her days quietly rearranges itself around a secret she does not know exists. As we move forward, let's stay with that tension, the comfort she feels, and the invisible lines being drawn around her, one helpful suggestion at a time. That narrowing of her world does not happen. It grows in soil that was already prepared for someone like Dexter Morgan to walk in and take up residence. Because before Dexter, there was Rita's mother. Rita's mother is not a monster in the way Trinity is, and not a predator in the way Dexter is, but she is sharp-tongued, pessimistic, and relentlessly efficient at finding the weak point in every choice Rita makes. She calls it realism. She calls it protecting her daughter from disappointment. What it feels like in every small domestic moment is a steady drip of contempt. You want full custody? That's knave. You think this man is different? That's irresponsible. You believe you can hold a family together? That's you setting yourself up to fail. Over time, those comments stop sounding like opinions and start sounding like facts. The story of Rita's life, according to her mother, is that she is knave. She is bad with mic installed, using her mother's voice. We are going to pay attention to those small moments when Rita hesitates around Dexter's explanations. When he disappears on a supposed Narcotics Anonymous sponsor, when he seems strangely calm in the middle of chaos, you can see flashes of doubt, a look that lingers a second too long, a question that almost forms. And then that other voice arrives. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe you're being ungrateful. Maybe this is what happens when you always pick the wrong man. The gaslighting does not begin with Dexter. It is simply continued by him, quietly, efficiently, as he lets Rita's own self, doubt, do the heavy lifting. He does not have to work very hard to keep her from digging deeper, because years of criticism have already done the groundwork of convincing her that her instincts are unreliable. This is the story of a woman standing between two forces, an openly critical mother and a secretly dangerous partner. One tells her directly that she cannot be trusted. The other benefits from her believing. In that space, isolation blooms. If something feels off with Dexter, maybe that is just her broken picker. If her mother sounds cruel, Maybe that is just what honesty sounds like. The problem, she assumes, must be her. And as we move into Rita's bigger suspicions later in the series, settle in, get comfortable, because those moments look very different once you understand the chorus already arguing against her in her own head. And that is exactly the headspace Rita is in when the next big milestones arrive, the baby and the house. On paper, these are the moments when her story finally turns a corner. For Rita, the decision to have a baby with Dexter is not just about expanding the family. It is about rewriting the narrative that Paul and her mother carved into her. A planned child with a man who does not hit her, who shows up for school plays and barbecues, feels like proof that she is not doomed to repeat the same cycle forever. This is the story of someone who has survived chaos and is finally allowed to want something ordinary. The house works the same way. That bright, suburban place with the yard and the swing set is not just a backdrop for Miami sunshine. It is a physical argument against everything she has been told about herself. People who are unstable do not get approved for mortgages. People who ruin everything do not get to pick paint colors and nursery themes. When she signs those papers, she is signing a contract with a future she has been told she does not deserve. But that is only one side of the story. Because for Dexter Morgan, these same milestones are double-edged. A baby means sleepless nights, unpredictable schedules, more people in and out of the house. A mortgage means fixed addresses, neighbors who notice when you leave at odd hours. Financial records that can be traced. Every new commitment complicates his logistics. At the same time, nothing deepens his mask more effectively. A devoted partner at prenatal appointments, a father assembling a crib, a homeowner grilling in the backyard while colleagues from Miami Metro Homicide make small talk. Every scene like that tells the world and tells Rita that this man is safe. When you lay them all out together, the ultrasound photos on the fridge, the mortgage paperwork on the counter, the tiny onesies folded in drawers, you start to see a web of commitments that does not just bind Dexter in place. It binds Rita. Because once those will later become a haunting symbol, the place where all of these assurances collapse at once. We are going to come back to that, because once you see what happens there, every earlier shot of that sunny facade feels different, and the way the show keeps returning to that facade is not an accident. If you pay attention to the visual rhythm of the series, you start to see a pattern that's almost comforting in how predictable it is. We move from a kill room or a tense night at Miami Metro Homicide, and then we are back in Rita's kitchen. Sunlight through the blinds. A cereal box on the counter. Astor and Cody's backpacks by the door. The camera lingers on her pouring coffee, packing lunches, straightening a picture frame, as if the lens itself wants to exhale. These are not just establishing shots, they are resets. Because every time Dexter Morgan steps out of a blood-soaked warehouse or a morgue, the series often sends him home to that house, to those kids' bedrooms, to a backyard birthday party or a barbecue. And every single time, the colors are warmer, the sound softer, the composition's wider. The domestic space becomes a palate cleanser, rinsing out the metallic taste of the kill so you can settle in, get comfortable again. But notice the condition on that comfort. The camera almost never follows Rita when Dexter is not there. We are going to see her at the door when he arrives late, at the table when he sits down, on the couch when he makes an excuse, when she goes to work, when she runs errands, when she has an interior life that doesn't orbit him. The lens mostly looks away. The story cuts back to the precinct, or the investigation, or Dexter's voiceover. This is the story of a woman whose home is meticulously documented, while she herself remains strangely out of frame. And when you lay them all out together, those sunny kitchen scenes, those bedtime rituals, those backyard gatherings, you start to see that Rita's normalcy is treated almost like a recurring set piece, a beautifully lit stage where Dexter can rehearse being human. It is effective, structurally. The more the series trains you to relax whenever you see that house, the more suspense it can generate by smuggling danger into that same space later. Every cut from a crime scene to Rita's smile reassures you that the mask is still on, that Dexter still blends, that the line between his two lives is, for the moment, intact. But it also quietly explains why it sucks to be Rita. Even in her own home, in her own carefully rebuilt life after Paul, the narrative frame is never really centered on her. She is collateral, not co-author, the person whose stability proves that Dexter's double life is working. And the more idealized that domestic world becomes, the more brutal it will feel when the series finally decides to break it. The same angles, the same rooms, the same front door we've been trained to trust will be waiting for us at the end of her arc, and what we find there will rewrite every earlier visit, because that is where we are going next. We have spent this opening movement laying out the quiet architecture of Rita's life, the way Dexter Morgan selects her, because her history of abuse makes her perfect cover, the way Miami Metro Homicide keeps cutting back to her kitchen or her driveway whenever Dexter's mask almost slips. We have watched Paul insist that Dexter framed him, watched Rita find the shoe that proves it, watched her choose the safer story, because everyone around her is feeding her half-truths. Her mother urges her to settle. The courts fail her. Dexter lies about drugs, quietly uses her as emotional camouflage for a... When you lay them all out together, the pattern is difficult to ignore. Every lie about a program, every staged relapse, every vague promise that he is getting better keeps Rita in the dark just enough to stay useful. The cycle of abuse continues. Only now it is wrapped in Dexter's gentleness and competence instead of Paul's rage. The harm is less visible, more deniable, and therefore easier for everyone, including us, to sleep through. From this point on, we're going to follow Rita from that height of apparent stability into the slow, almost imperceptible unraveling that ends with her death. The cracks in the marriage, the nights he disappears, the arguments she half wins and then apologizes for, the moments when she almost sees him, when a line of questioning gets too close and Dexter redirects with a confession that is technically true but fundamentally misleading. The series will keep weaponizing our attachment to her normalcy, the backyard barbecue that plays under the shadow of the Bay Harbor butcher investigation, the baby monitor and the blood slides coexisting in the same episode, the safe home image that will eventually be inverted in the most literal, brutal way the show can manage. We are going to move through those near misses and red flags calmly, the way you might let an episode play while you drift off, except this time the focus stays on what it costs Rita for Dexter to stay hidden. And as we trace that line, we will keep coming back to a quieter question. How many points along this path could her fate have changed if even one person in her life had decided she deserved the full truth? So as we move along that path, we're going to sit with one of the quietest, most corrosive dynamics in the whole series. The way Dexter narrates Rita's life as if he were reading notes from an experiment, while she talks about him like a second chance at being loved. Early on, the contrast is almost gentle. Rita is on the phone with a friend, or sitting with her mother, saying things like, "He's so patient with the kids," or, "Dexter doesn't pressure me." Her voice is soft, a little incredulous, as if she cannot quite believe that a man can show up, bring donuts, fix a sink, and not hit her. In the same episode, Dexter's voiceover calmly explains that he chose Rita because her trauma means she is damaged enough not to ask questions. For her, this is hope. For him, it is a risk profile. The pattern only sharpens when you lay them all out together. Their first real date, the one that plays with candles and nervous smiles, and the sense that maybe this is where the story turns for her, is framed by Dexter as a test of his ability to appear normal. He studies menus and small talk the way he studies blood spatter, running through what a boyfriend should say, what a good man should want. Every romantic beat Rita experiences, he quietly tags as data. Even the first time they have sex is split down this same fault line. For Rita, it is a milestone in healing, after Paul, proof that her body can be a place of safety again. For Dexter, it is a breakthrough in deepening his cover, an upgrade from convenient girlfriend to believable partner. The voiceover does not wonder what she is feeling. It wonders what this will allow him to do next, how many more nights he can slip away without suspicion now that intimacy has been checked off the list. When Dexter meets Astor and Cody in a more permanent way, the script divides again. Rita imagines a blended future, a man who will help her win full custody and build a stable home in Miami. She is doing the emotional labor of projecting. She thinks they are co-writing a life. He is redacting it. And you start to see the poison there, the way a marriage can rot before it ever fully forms. If only one person in it knows it is supposed to be real, how long can that kind of asymmetry hold before the mask slips, or someone gets erased from the story altogether? And that is where another, quieter cruelty starts to surface. It is not just that Dexter edits the story, it is that the role he writes for Rita sounds like a love interest, but functions like a leash. From almost the first episode, Morgan tells us that Rita is perfect for him because she is damaged, because she does not expect much, because she is too busy surviving to ask where he goes at night. On the page, that can look like a broken man finding solace with a broken woman. But when you lay them all out together, those lines read less like affection and more like a predator describing ideal conditions. Low vigilance, low demands, high cover. Dexter frames it as gratitude. She is good for him. She makes the dark passenger quieter. She gives his mask a reason to smile. And because we are going to spend so much time inside his narration, you start to see how easily that framing becomes the only one that matters. The camera lingers on her softness, her patience, her tendency to apologize first. The subtext is simple. This is what keeps him in check. For Rita, that message seeps in slowly. Every moment she is praised, it is almost always for the same things. For being understanding when he disappears, for being forgiving when he lies about a relapse, for staying calm with Paul, with the kids, with the chaos of Miami Metro homicide orbiting her kitchen without explanation. She learns, the way people do in long relationships, which parts of herself are rewarded, the soothing ones, the stabilizing ones, the parts that give Dexter a reason to be better, even when he is not actually changing at all. Watch how often he compliments her for being predictable, for liking routine, for not wanting much more than family dinners and a backyard. It sounds tender. It is also a subtle training program. When she does get angry, when she questions his absences or pushes on his secrets, the warmth recedes. He becomes distant, evasive, suddenly fragile. The unspoken bargain is clear. Be gentle, be non-confrontational, and you get the version of him who says you saved his life. So she adjusts. She downplays her needs, smooths over her resentment, tells herself that his skittishness is about trauma or addiction instead of what it really is. This is the story of someone who survived one abuser by learning to keep the peace, and then is quietly rewarded for repeating that pattern with a more sophisticated one. And there is one more twist. When you are constantly told you are good for someone, that you are their anchor, their conscience, their last defense against their worst impulses, you stop asking a very basic question. Are they actually good for you? The series lets that question hang unanswered for a long time as their marriage moves forward on the strength of his need and her silence, until the cost of never asking it comes due in the harshest possible way. Because notice what the series never gives her in exchange for that silence. Almost every major character orbiting Dexter Morgan has some kind of pressure valve, some sanctioned way for the story to crack open their interior. Deb has phone call awareness. Imagine instead that the series let her speak, not in some grand, out-of-character speech, but in the same tentative, careful language she already uses. In a therapist's office, she might start with, "He's wonderful with the kids. I know he loves them. I know he loves me. Sometimes I feel like he's somewhere else." There would be a pause. Then the quieter admission with Paul, "I always knew when something was wrong. With Dexter, I never know. And that scares me more." You can almost hear her rehearsing the lines she never says to him. "I don't want to be the crazy one again. My mom already thinks I picked the wrong men. What if she's right? What if I ruin this too?" It is grounded, it fits everything we see on screen, and yet the story keeps that interior monologue hypothetical, always just out of reach. Her doubts arrive to us as small comments, softened questions, immediately smoothed over by his latest cover story. And because we live inside Dexter's narration, because Miami Metro homicide is framed through his gaze, those doubts are incredibly easy to file under Rita is overreacting, instead of Rita is correctly reading a pattern of half-truths. This is the story of a woman whose instincts are sound, but whose perspective is structurally undercut by the way the series is told. Every moment she moves toward clarity, the edit follows him instead. That is where the structural gaslighting comes in. On the interpersonal level, Morgan lies, minimizes, redirects. On the narrative level, the show does something parallel. It withholds her processing, cuts away from the aftermath, and reassures you with his calm, clever narration that everything is under control. Let's be clear, that is a choice that keeps you aligned with the killer's comfort rather than the survivor's unease, right up until the point where that unease becomes impossible to ignore. And that brings us back to the other man the show keeps using to study you whenever Rita's unease threatens to surface. The obvious villain, the one it is safe to hate. Paul is written as the kind of danger you can see coming. He hits her. He terrorizes the kids. He violates restraining orders and shows up at the house in the middle of the night, yelling on the lawn, turning their quiet little space into a crime scene before Miami Metro homicide even arrives. He hides drugs, he lies to the court, he plays the victim, and then snaps the second he does not get his way. On a narrative level, this is clean. He is the problem, he is the past, and Rita's job is to survive him. Which is exactly why Dexter Morgan benefits so much from standing next to him. When you lay them all out together, Paul is chaos, volume, bruises you can photograph. Dexter is soft voice, steady hands, a man who brings donuts and fixes things. One storms into the house and throws accusations. The other quietly takes out the trash and watches cartoons with the kids. And because we are going to, we have to notice how that contrast launders Dexter's own deception. Next to the screaming, the calm reads as safety, even when the calm is a mask. Every moment Paul escalates, Dexter looks more reasonable. When Paul insists that Dexter framed him with the heroin, we already know he is right. We watch Dexter knock him out, plant the drugs, and let the system do the rest. But inside the story, you start to see how impossible it would be for her to pause and think, what if this one accusation is different? There is a quiet tragedy in that. The man who hurt her most becomes one of the only people who ever gets that close to the truth about Dexter, and the show buries that truth with him. Paul dies, his warnings are folded into his monstrousness, and Dexter walks away with the narrative of the good man who protected Rita from her abuser. Settle in. Get comfortable with that, because in the next part, we are going to look at how completely Rita builds her future on that illusion. Rita builds that future in a house that looks, on the surface, like safety finally did what it promised. Sunlight through gauzy curtains, pastel walls, kid art layered on the fridge, so thick you can barely see the metal anymore. Toys scattered across the floor, a high chair in the corner, cereal boxes on the counter. This is not Miami Metro homicide. This is not a kill room. The visual language could not be clearer. When Dexter is at work or hunting, the palette drops a few shades lower. Blues and grays in the lab, sodium vapor yellows in parking lots, plastic sheeting, metal tables, drains. But when he walks through Rita's front door, the whole series brightens. You start to see open windows, backyard sprinklers, birthday banners, sunlight glinting off juice glasses instead of blood slides. It is the same man, the same double life, but the frame insists this part is gentle. That is exactly where the gaslighting lives. Not in shouting matches or overturned furniture, but in calm conversations over breakfast where Dexter explains away another late night. Work at Miami Metro ran long. I had to help Deb with a case. Half-truths offered in a kitchen, painted soft yellow, with Astor and Cody arguing over who gets the last waffle. The domestic noise becomes cover. The brightness makes the lie feel reasonable. Watch how often it happens in motion. Dexter loading kids into the car, buckling seatbelts, giving a quick kiss, before peeling off toward something much darker than traffic. He talks about stress, about needing space, about being tired. Every moment is framed by car seats, school backpacks, and the Florida sun bouncing off the windshield. The staging tells you this is normal. The content, if you strip the images away, would sound like a man who is never quite where he says he is. This is the story of a home that is weaponized by its own aesthetics. Rita is encouraged to doubt the small alarms in her head, precisely because nothing around her matches the feeling that something is wrong. No slammed doors, no obvious bruises, just a man who brings donuts, fixes the faucet, and sometimes disappears. When you lay them all out together, the pastel kitchens, the backyard barbecues, the baby showers, you start to see how the series uses softness as a kind of tranquilizer. And we're going to feel that more acutely on rewatch. Settle in, get comfortable, and look again at those scenes where Dexter confesses to a drug problem in that bright living room, or promises to do better while bathed in afternoon light. The visuals are doing as much work as his words, lulling Rita and you into accepting the explanation. Now, let's move closer to the moments when that carefully lit normalcy starts to flicker, and the danger inside the picture frame finally leaks through. So when that then the bigger storms roll through. While the ice truck killer investigation closes in, Brian is leaving pieces of a doll in Dexter's freezer, in Rita's kitchen, inches from where she makes school lunches. The line between his domestic life and his homicidal world is not just thin, it is literally stored on the same shelves. Rita opens that freezer every morning and never knows that a serial killer is talking to another serial killer over the frozen peas. The pattern keeps escalating. Paul confronts Dexter in Rita's house, in front of the kid, accusing him of planting the heroin. Paul is, inconveniently, right. The argument, the shoving, the police at the door afterward, all play as a domestic dispute. But for Dexter, it is a near-exposure scene staged in Rita's living room, one where the truth is sitting in the middle of the carpet and everyone politely steps around it. Birthday parties and barbecues become their own kind of crime scenes. Dexter disappears from Cody's party to chase a suspect. He takes secret calls from Deborah or from Miami Metro Homicide, while balloons and streamers fill the frame. He shows up late, sweaty, with a flimsy excuse. The show keeps cutting between the safety of cake and candles and the danger of whatever body he was just standing over, teaching you to associate Rita's milestones with his panic. And that repetition does something inside Dexter's head. The more his close calls cluster around Rita's space, the more she stops being just a comfort and starts to register as a liability. Not because she is doing anything wrong, but because her very presence means noise, witnesses, questions, schedules, all the fragile details that make secrecy harder. This is the story of a man who tells himself she is his support system, while quietly resenting the way her life narrows his margins. When your living room is the place where someone else's secrets almost explode, you are always one coincidence away from your entire reality shattering. The series keeps bringing us right up to that coincidence, and then backing away, so softly you almost stop expecting it to happen. Now, let's stay in that house a little longer and look at how Rita herself is trained not to see the blast coming, even as it keeps brushing past her face. So we stay in that house, and suddenly it is not just any day, it is a birthday. Streamers taped slightly crooked along the walls, a store-bought banner that says, "Happy Birthday, Astor," plastic cups lined up on the counter like little soldiers. Rita is in motion in every corner of the frame, frosting on her wrist, a mental checklist running behind her eyes. This is the day she is going to prove to her kids that life can be normal. The camera gives you the bright surface first. Kids shrieking in the yard, a rented bounce house breathing in and out, paper plates bending under the weight of supermarket. Rita laughing a little too loudly when someone compliments the decorations, because for her, this is not just a party, it is evidence. Evidence that she got them away from Paul. Evidence that the story of their childhood can be rewritten with balloons and goodie bags. And then, somewhere just off-center, there is Dexter Morgan, holding a camcorder, wearing a party hat that looks almost like a joke on the idea of a mask. On paper, he is the perfect addition to this scene, the steady boyfriend, the dependable man from Miami Metro Homicide, who shows up on time, brings ice, and offers to pick up the pizza. His mood, yes, but she is also checking the foundation of the life she is building on top of him. Dexter smiles, squeezes her hand, and lies. Just tired. Long night at the lab. The words are not really about comforting her. They are about buying time, sealing off this bright kitchen from the other room in his life, where plastic sheeting hangs and people beg. When you lay them all out together, these moments at the party start to feel like a miniature of the entire series. Rita builds joy like a careful set decorator, assuming the walls are solid. Dexter moves through the same space, calculating angles, exits, alibis. You start to see that every balloon string is tied to something he is not saying. This is the story of a woman hosting a birthday while a man conducts a risk assessment in her living room. And as we are going to see, the closer Rita gets to finally relaxing into this new life, the more dangerous it becomes for her to stand anywhere near the blast radius of Dexter's other world. And somewhere in the middle of all those balloons and paper plates, something quieter starts to happen. The party ends, the dishes are stacked in the sink, and Rita is left alone with the silence that follows Dexter Morgan out the door. We are going to sit in those silences for a minute, because that is where the first hairline crack, not in the big confrontations, not in the dramatic reveals, but in the small, almost forgettable moments where Rita's face shifts half an inch and she does not quite believe what she is hearing. There's the night Dexter shows up late, again with another gentle apology and another vague reference to work at Miami Metro Homicide. The camera lingers on her just a fraction too long. She smiles, she nods, she says she understands. But her eyes stay on him, studying, as if she is trying to line up the man who brings donuts and the man who keeps vanishing into the dark. Then she looks away, because she has been here before. Rita's past with Paul hangs over every moment like a warning label. She remembers what it was like to be told she was crazy, paranoid, ungrateful, to find evidence, to confront him, and to be turned into the problem. So when a little alarm goes off in her head about Dexter, she flinches from it. She does not want to become that version of herself again, the woman tearing apart her own life, trying to prove a point. So she overcorrects. She gives Morgan the benefit of the doubt again and again. When he claims a drug addiction to cover his late nights, you start to see the conflict play across her face. Part of her is relieved. A secret she understands is better than a secret she cannot name. Another part knows that this explanation arrived too neatly, too quickly, like a prepackaged excuse. But Dexter is skilled at plausible stories. Every close call gets wrapped in the language of stress, work, recovery. He does not erase her unease. He teaches her how to swallow it. Each time she backs down after raising a concern, the dissonance inside her grows a little louder, even as her voice on the outside gets softer. When you lay them all out together, these moments form a quiet pattern. The half-finished questions. The way she starts a sentence with Dexter, sometimes I feel, and then abandons it when he deflects with a kiss or a promise. The way she watches him leave, standing in the doorway, a second longer than the scene really needs. This is the story of a woman trying to convince herself that stability has finally arrived, while her body keeps registering danger before her mind will admit it. And as we settle in, get comfortable with these tiny, he admits to a darkness he cannot always control, and every time he removes the word killer from the sentence. On paper, it looks honest. In practice, it is one of the most effective masks he ever wears. Think about the addiction arc in season 1. When Rita finds out about the heroin paraphernalia, Dexter does not deny that something is wrong. He leans into, he confesses to a drug problem, talks about feeling broken, about not wanting to hurt her or the kids. The shame is real. The fear is real. The object of the compulsion is the only thing that has been swapped out. And because the emotion matches her own history with Paul, the confession feels complete when it is not. Rita responds exactly the way someone who has begged for honesty her entire life would respond. She is patient. She is proud of him for opening up. She drives him to rehab, stands at his side, tells herself that this is what a healthy relationship looks like after years of secrecy and instability. Every moment of empathy from her is genuine. Every moment of disclosure from him is calibrated. When you lay them all out together, these conversations form a pattern. The night Dexter disappears chasing the ice truck killer and comes home shaken, he does not say, "I almost got caught stalking a murderer." He says he got wrapped up in a case, that it triggered things about his past, that he is afraid of being a good partner, a good father to Astor and Cody. Later, when he is spiraling around Trinity, he tells Rita he is terrified of becoming like his father, of failing his new baby. Again, the fear is real. The missing context is the bodies. We are going to see that this trains Rita to accept partial transparency as progress. Each half confession diffuses her concern just enough that she can sleep, and it rewards her with the feeling of finally being trusted. The more honest Dexter appears, the more effectively he hides, and the more invested she becomes in defending the version of him she thinks she knows. Now, let's follow that investment forward, because the next step is even crueler. The series starts handing Rita actual clues, and by then, she is already fluent in Dexter's half-truths as a love language. By the time the show starts putting real evidence in Rita's hands, something quiet has already happened. Her emotional weather has become part of how you read danger in this story. When Rita is calm, when the house is soft and domestic, and she is just happy that Dexter came home when he said he would, the series often lets Morgan's darker work accelerate. Season 1 gives you this rhythm early. Rita is focused on custody of Astor and Cody, on standing up to Paul, and trying to believe that a good man might actually stay. While she is making dinner and talking about parent-teacher meetings, Dexter is slipping out to follow the ice truck killer's clues, dumping bodies, refining his rituals. The more serene she seems, the more you start to understand that his mask is holding. At least for now. Then the air changes. On the nights when Rita is anxious, when she is watching Dexter instead of just looking at him, that usually means pressure is building somewhere else in Miami Metro homicide. Her suspicion about his supposed drug addiction flares at the same time Doakes is tailing him, and the Bay Harbor butcher profile is tightening around a forensics insider with a boat. Her anger when Paul accuses Dexter of framing him arrives in the same run of episodes where external investigations are one mistake away from putting Morgan in handcuffs. The domestic informed person in Dexter's inner circle. She does not know about the slides, the code, the kill room plastic, yet when you lay them all out together, her reactions are some of the most accurate indicators of when his world is about to spin out. She feels the tremors before the quake, not because she understands the seismic map, but because she lives on the fault line. Now, let's carry that idea forward, because we are going to see this pattern reach its cruel peak with Trinity, Rita at her happiest, the gauge reading all clear. At the exact moment the series is about to drop its most devastating revelation. Rita's happiness with Trinity is not an accident of timing. It is built on the same structure that has been holding her up and holding her back since the first season. Motherhood, routine, the never-ending list of small tasks that quietly decide what you do and do not have the energy to notice. Every morning there are school runs, lunches to pack, Astor's moods, Cody's nightmares, Harrison's feedings. Every evening there is homework, bath time, bedtime, the delicate art of getting 3 children to lie still while your own mind is racing. By the time Dexter Morgan drifts in with another vague story about work at Miami Metro homicide, she is already spent. She has done the emotional labor for 4 people before he even walks through the door. And that exhaustion becomes part of his mask. When you lay them all out together, the moments where she could press, where she could say, "No, really, where were you?" you start to see how often they land right after a crisis with the kids. Paul shows up high and violent, Astor regresses, Cody acts out at school. The conversation that might have been about Dexter's disappearing acts becomes a conversation about custody agreements, therapy appointments, and whether the children feel safe. Dexter learns to lean into this. He is not just hiding behind Rita, he is hiding behind their schedules. A difficult question about his late-night absence turns into a gentle reminder that they have Astor's recital in the morning. A tense moment after Paul accuses him of framing him slides away when Dexter says he is only trying to protect the children. When he calls his stalking rituals and blood-soaked errands a kind of addiction, the framing is always the same. He wants to get better. For them. That phrase, for the kids, is a shield. It shuts down escalation. It makes Rita feel that pushing harder is selfish, that any doubt she has about Dexter is a threat to the fragile stability she has clawed back from her years with Paul. This is the story of how being a good mother becomes her softest spot. Her identity is so bound up in keeping Astor and Cody safe that she will readily sacrifice her own unease, her own questions, if the alternative looks like another broken home. And later, with Harrison, that vulnerability deepens. Now there is a baby in the house, now sleep is fragmented. Now every spare moment is swallowed by feedings and laundry and the logistics of blending a family. Settle in, get comfortable, the show is saying, because this is the perfect environment for someone like Dexter Morgan. A partner who benefits from you being too busy, too tired, and too guilt-ridden to follow the thread all the way to the end. This is not just Rita's tragedy, it is a broader pattern. Caregiving roles can be quietly exploited by anyone who understands that if he's physically accounted for, he does not need passion. He needs paperwork, witnesses, and a narrative that explains where he is supposed to be every night. So when he chooses that moment to propose, it is not emerging from a season of shared healing or deep conversations about Rita's wants. It is emerging from external pressure and an internal calculation. If he is a fiancé, then a husband, then a father again. The mask thickens. The Bay Harbor butcher cannot live in the same body as the man who just moved his growing family to the suburbs. On paper, the proposal scene itself is framed like a classic romantic beat. Soft light, close framing, Rita's face opening with surprise, then gratitude, then tears. The camera invites you to experience it as a culmination, as if this is the story of a good man finally stepping up. But inside Dexter's narration, we are going to hear something colder. He is thinking about stability, about making things simpler, about how this will help him keep his life in order so he can keep killing. Rita, meanwhile, is reading an entirely different script. For her, marriage represents safety after years of chaos with Paul. A husband who does not scream, who does not hit, who does not drag her back into court over custody. When you lay them all out, together Paul's abuse, her mother's criticism, the constant fear of losing the kids, you start to see why that small velvet box lands like a lifeline. It is not just romance. It is a promise that the worst is finally behind her. That hope is powerful. It also makes her less likely to interrogate the timing. Why now? In the middle of so much tension at work. Why now, when Dexter has seemed distracted and distant? She does not push, because the story she needs is that good things can finally happen to her without a hidden cost. But there is a cost. The asymmetry here is brutal. For Dexter, marriage is a strategic move, another layer of insulation between his night work and the eyes of Miami Metro homicide. For Rita, it is a healing narrative, the culmination of survival. Those two meanings cannot coexist forever. Now, let's sit with what happens when that mismatch starts to fracture under real pressure. So when the engagement ring appears, the story does something quietly cruel. It hands Rita Morgan the exact fantasy she has been training herself to believe in, just as the ground under it starts to move. On the surface, this is her golden season. We see her light up over dresses, talking about necklines and veils with the kind of shy excitement that feels almost borrowed. Like she is trying on not just fabric, but an entirely new life. She tours venues, imagines where Astor and Cody will stand, folds baby Harrison into every plan. For Rita, this wedding is not just an event. It is a fresh start, a formal promise that the chaos of Paul, of police reports, and bruises and court dates is over. Safety, but notarized. But that is only one layer, because at the very same time, Dexter Morgan's complications are not shrinking, they are multiplying. Investigations are tightening around the Bay Harbor butcher. Old suspicions from Miami Metro homicide never fully go away. Enemies like Miguel and, later, Trinity are not background noise, they are active fault lines running straight through Dexter's calendar. And yet, he keeps all of that in a different mental folder, carefully sealed away from the guest list and the cake tastings. There are moments when Rita's face changes, just a fraction. She hears the strain in his voice, notices how his eyes are somewhere else when she is talking about flower arrangements. In another story, this would be the point where she uncovers an affair, or at least a secret addiction. Here, we are going to watch her do something more tragic. She explains it away for him. Cold feet. Pressure at Miami Metro. New baby, new house, big transition. She stacks reasonable explanations over something that is not reasonable at all, because the alternative would mean the wedding is not a sanctuary. It is a risk. When you lay them all out together, the planning scenes start to feel almost haunted. Every checklist is written over a fault line that is already cracking. This is the story of a meticulously organized ceremony being built on an actively shifting foundation, and the series knows exactly how unsettling that contrast can be when it plays it quietly. Settle in, get comfortable, because that tension is not done escalating. The closer Rita gets to the aisle, the more violently Dexter's other life will push back against the fantasy she is trying to protect. And one of the quietest ways that fantasy holds is through who is not there. For all the hours we spend in Rita's kitchen, in her living room, on that little patch of front lawn where kids and groceries and wedding plans blur together, we almost never see a real friend who belongs only to her. Not Dexter's colleagues dropping by, not family circling like planets around the same gravity well. Someone who knew Rita before Morgan ever walked into Miami Metro homicide and smiled his way into her life. That absence is not loud. It is just consistent. Season after season, her social world collapses into three circles: her children, her difficult mother, and Dexter's orbit. The barbecues are his coworkers. The parties are his milestones. Even her bachelorette energy gets swallowed by Deb, who is there as Dexter's sister first and Rita's confidante second. When you lay them all out together, you start to see how thoroughly the series has trimmed away any independent chorus that might sing a different song about him. Because this is the story of a woman who has been taught over and over that her best option is to make do with what is in front of her. Paul isolated her through violence and fear. Her mother isolates her through judgment and blame. Dexter isolates her through kindness and omission. Every missing friend, every unreturned girls' night, every off-screen relationship that never materializes becomes structural support for his mask. Without that support system, there are fewer outside perspectives to catch the dissonance she keeps swallowing. When Dexter disappears on work, there is no coworker of hers to say that the hours sound strange. When she is told about his supposed drug addiction, there is no sponsor, no therapist, no longtime friend to quietly point out that the story does not add up. The only people she can turn to are already invested in Dexter's version of reality, or too far away from the details to see the cracks. The moments when someone does talk to Rita about Dexter are telling. Deb tries, occasionally, but her own loyalty and blindness put a ceiling on what she can offer. She reassures Rita that Dexter is a good man, that he is just distant, that he is worth waiting for. It is meant as comfort. It functions as containment. Even Paul, who actually gets closest to the truth when he insists Dexter framed him, because there is a night where it almost breaks, where Rita stands in front of Dexter Morgan, and for a brief moment, you start to see a different story trying to be born. The cleanest example lives in season 2, when Dexter's drug addiction finally stops being a vague excuse and becomes a concrete accusation. Rita finds the syringes, the lies about late nights, the erratic disappearances that do not line up with the gentle man who brings donuts to Miami Metro homicide and plays with her kids on the floor. She has lived with chaos before. She knows what it looks like when the person you love vanishes into a private world and leaves you holding the consequences. On the surface, her stated reasons are practical and protective. She tells him she cannot expose Astor and Cody to another addict. She cannot keep explaining away bruised feelings and broken promises. She lays a line in the sand, "Get help, or this ends." It sounds firm, almost rehearsed, the language of someone who has done the work in therapy and support groups. But underneath, something softer and more frightened is speaking. If she leaves Dexter, she is alone again, a single mother in a small house with bills and court dates and a baby on the way. If she detonates this relationship, she risks destabilizing the fragile sense of safety she has finally given her children. And if she admits that she chose another damaged man, that she repeated the cycle that started with Paul, then the progress she has made starts to feel like an illusion. That is a terrifying admission for anyone, and the series lets you feel how heavy it is for her. Now, let's look at how Dexter answers that fear. He gives her partial honesty. Yes, there are syringes. Yes, there is a secret. He frames it as a relapse into drugs, as a shameful but familiar vice, something that fits into a story Rita already understands. He promises change, promises meetings, promises to be accountable, and crucially, he wraps every assurance in appeals to family, to the kids, to their future, to the life they are building. When you lay them all out together, you see how precisely he presses every pressure point that keeps her rooted in place. He is damaged, but trying, secretive, but now apparently confessing, absent, but for a reason she can name and therefore manage. This is the story of a man she can save, not a man she must flee. And once she chooses to stay, the emotional cost doubles, because when you almost leave and then turn back, you do not return as a skeptic. You return as a believer. You have to, or the dissonance will tear you apart. Rita invests even more deeply in Dexter's mask, in the idea that this time will be different, which means that when the real betrayal finally arrives, it will not feel like a twist. It will feel like the universe cashing a debt she has been trying not to look at for years. And that belief has a set design. Every time we cut from Dexter's blood spatter lab or a kill room back to Rita's apartment, the series is resetting your nervous system. Harsh fluorescence and stainless steel give way to soft lamps, pastel walls, toys on the floor, a fridge covered in crayon drawings. The soundscape shifts from the hum of Miami Metro homicide to kids arguing over the bathroom. Visually, you are being told, over and over, that this is the safe place. This is where the story exhales. But that safety is also a tool. From the beginning, Dexter chooses Rita because her life is already full of court dates, custody battles, school pickups. He can plug his... When Doakes tails him in Season 2 and corners him about his absences, Dexter deflects with talk of Rita and personal issues, and the scene cuts away before anyone asks Rita what those issues are doing to her. When you lay them all out together, you realize how often the simple phrase "I was" with my girlfriend and her kids functions like a magic spell that disarms suspicion. And the series trains us to accept that spell. We are going to follow Dexter into the marina, into the Everglades, into plastic-lined rooms, then glide back to Rita's kitchen as if we have passed through decontamination. The cost of that transition is that Rita's complexity gets wiped down. 2, her needs compress into a single narrative function. Be believable enough that no one questions where Morgan really was last night. Inside the fiction that has consequences, Rita wants time, intimacy, emotional support. She asks for help with Paul, with money, with the kids' fear. Dexter offers just enough presence, just enough wounded vulnerability about his supposed addictions to keep her from pushing harder. Her loneliness is reframed as his cover. The nights he vanishes are the nights she puts the kids to bed alone and tells herself this is what healing looks like. This is the story of a woman whose entire arc is gradually bent around someone else's camouflage, and the narrative rarely pauses to ask the simplest counterfactual: What would Rita's life look like if she were not busy justifying another man's secrets? Settle in, get comfortable, because the next near misses will answer that question in the cruelest possible way. Because every camouflage needs more than color. It needs a calendar. Rita's life runs on small, reliable markers. School drop-offs, pickups, pediatrician appointments, her shifts, her meetings with the lawyer about Paul, bedtime routines with exactly one more story and one more glass of water. When you lay them all out together, you start to see a grid appear, a quiet lattice of predictability. And Dexter Morgan's double life is draped neatly over that lattice, like a second, invisible schedule. By day, we see the version everyone in Miami believes in. Dexter leaves Rita's house at a normal time, kisses the kids, drives to Miami Metro homicide. He is the man who has somewhere to be. Someone waiting for him. A domestic anchor that makes his nights look harmless by default. And every single time he says, "I have to work late," or "Deb needs me on a case," those lies only work because they are contrasted against Rita's relentlessly ordinary timetable. He is expected home. Which is exactly why no one imagines he is out on a kill. This is the story of logistics disguised as love. When Dexter tracks a target, he does not just study blood. He studies Rita's week. He knows when Astor has a recital, when Cody has a game, when Rita has to be in court for another hearing with Paul. Those are the pockets he slips into. The evenings Rita is distracted, the nights she falls asleep early from exhaustion, the weekends she takes the kids to her mother's. The mask stays intact because her calendar is so solid that his absences seem like small, understandable exceptions. And then there are the adjustments. Rita moving a date night because Dexter is buried in reports. Rita watching the kids alone while he disappears to help Deb. Rita forgiving a missed anniversary to understand becomes the reason no one else ever thinks to question where he is. Now, let's follow what happens when that carefully balanced calendar collides with someone else's rituals. And Rita's stable schedule places her directly in the path of Dexter's most dangerous mirror. That dangerous mirror Dexter keeps dodging is not just another killer or another cop at Miami Metro homicide. It is the quiet, persistent reflection of other people's opinions, bounced back at Rita until she can no longer see her own face clearly. From the very beginning, we are going to hear it. Friends at the barbecue, coworkers at the precinct picnic, even Deb half laughing in the kitchen. Dexter is such a good guy, so patient, great with the kids. Every compliment lands the same way. He shows up with donuts, he fixes a door, he plays catch with Cody for 5 uninterrupted minutes, and suddenly there is a chorus around Rita telling her how lucky she is. When you lay them all out together, these moments stop being background noise and start to sound like a spell. Because Rita has heard this song before. With Paul, the story was that he was trying, that she should be grateful he was around at all, that a man who comes home sometimes and does not hit you every night is still better than being alone. Her mother reinforces it, pressing the idea that stability, any stability, is a gift she should not question. So when Dexter's distance shows up as late nights, vague explanations, and that strange emotional blankness, Rita's discomfort has to fight through years of training that tell her the same thing: be thankful for the crumbs. The series itself leans into that gaslight glow. Watch how the framing shifts whenever Rita talks about how much Dexter means to her. Soft music, warm lighting, kids in the background, Dexter Morgan smiling just enough. The camera lingers on the family tableau while we, and Dexter's internal monologue, know he is hiding bloodslide, bodies, entire seasons of violence. The mask is never more convincing than in those domestic scenes where the show invites you to relax, to settle in, get comfortable, and accept the image at face value. But that is where the trap tightens. If every friend, every coworker, every visual cue from the story says Dexter is perfect, then what does Rita do with the hollow feeling that keeps surfacing when he drifts away mid-conversation? You start to see the loop she is caught in. If he is a great boyfriend, a devoted husband, a wonderful father, and she still feels lonely, then the conclusion almost writes itself. The problem must be her. This is the story of a woman slowly taught to doubt her own instincts. And as the near misses around Dexter escalate, that internal doubt will make her even less likely to notice when the danger is no longer abstract, but standing right beside her. And that loneliness becomes the perfect opening. Because before Dexter, there was already a man who taught Rita that her feelings could not be trusted. Paul does it loudly. We are going to sit with that for a moment, because it matters how the pattern starts. He intimidates her in the doorway, crowds her in the kitchen, turns every conversation into a cross-examination about the kids. When she remembers him hitting her, he remembers her provoking him. When she calls the police, he calls her vindictive. Every moment is rewritten in real time, so that Rita is hysterical. And Paul is the reasonable father, just trying to see his children. He pulls Astor and Cody into it, too. He cries in front of them about how mommy is keeping them apart. When you lay them all out together, you start to see the parallels. Paul insists he is sober and Rita is overreacting. Dexter insists he has a minor drug problem, and Rita is simply worried. Paul hides relapses, Dexter hides murders. Paul swears he is being framed when the heroin turns up in his car. Dexter withholds the crucial detail that he is the one who put it there. In both cases, the man stands in front of her and says, in effect, I am the one who really knows what is going on here. Dexter's tools are softer. He redirects conversations when she gets too close, offers just enough affection to soothe the question away. He misses a school event, then spends the evening fixing a broken faucet, holding the baby, kissing her forehead. The line is clear. If she feels uneasy, it is because she is tired, stressed, shaped by Paul, not because Morgan is lying. And the irony is quiet, but sharp. The man who framed Paul becomes the man whose word about Paul she trusts the most. The new husband who rescues her from one abuser's story becomes the unseen editor of her next one. This is the story of a woman moving from a partner who openly dominates her reality to a partner who gently rearranges it in his favor. And as Dexter's secrets press harder against the walls of that carefully managed life, the question is no longer whether Rita will see the truth, but what it will cost her if she ever does. And this is where the series quietly changes the subject. Instead of asking whether Rita is safe with Dexter Morgan, the camera keeps asking whether Rita will be okay with herself. We are going to move through whole stretches of story where her fear fills the frame, while his violence slips by in the negative space. Season 1 gives you the template. While Rita is locked in a custody battle with Paul, terrified of losing Astor and Cody, the A-plot in her world is court dates, bruises, and visitation schedules. In the same episodes, Dexter is tracking the ice truck killer, stalking crime scenes, and experimenting with his own origin story. But when you lay them all out together, you start to see how often the edit leaves Dexter's kills as quick, almost procedural interludes, then lingers on Rita's face as she wonders if she is failing her children. The pattern holds. In Father Knows Best, Rita has an emotional breakdown over money and the pressure of holding everything together. Dexter flies out to handle his father's estate and ends up disposing of a body. The cutting moves calmly between Rita's domestic panic in Miami and Dexter's methodical cleanup, as if these are parallel, equivalent tasks on a shared to-do list. One is framed as a crisis, the other is framed as an errand. By the time we reach Season 2 and the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, Miami Metro homicide is on high alert, but the show still uses Rita as smoke. While the FBI profile is circling dangerously close to Dexter, a forensically skilled insider with about Rita's immediate story is about his supposed drug addiction. Her fear is not that she is sleeping next to a serial killer. Her fear is that she has chosen another addict. The edit reinforces that. We cut from tense task force briefings to Rita rehearsing boundaries, flushing evidence, kicking Dexter out, then forgiving him. Dexter's behavior in that structure becomes a puzzle for him to solve. How to hide the blood slides, how to fake recovery, how to keep the mask on at work. Rita's behavior becomes the urge of the story of a show that teaches you where to look. And once that lesson is in place, the next escalation in Rita's life feels less like a warning sign and more like another obstacle for Dexter to navigate, right up until the cost of that distraction finally arrives at their front door. And the strangest part is how close Dexter Morgan comes to stopping it. Not by changing who he is, but by almost telling Rita who he is, over and over, and then pulling back at the last possible second. We are going to sit with those edges. The nights where the mask slips just enough that he can feel the cold air on his face, but not enough for Rita to see what is underneath. Because when you lay them all out together, you start to see a pattern that looks a lot less like romantic vulnerability and a lot more like maintenance on a very fragile cover story. In season 1, Dexter stands in Rita's kitchen and tells her he has a problem. He lets the word addiction hang there, heavy, suggestive, almost honest. For a beat, you can feel him measuring how much truth the room can hold. Then, he redirects it into a fake drug habit. It is a half confession, real shame, real secrecy, wrong crime. Rita responds the only way she knows how. She believes him. She offers him the same empathy she once needed when Paul was in and out of jail, framing his struggle as something they can face together. Later, after Brian kidnaps her children, Dexter sits with Rita in the aftermath. He tells her there are things about his past he doesn't remember, that he feels broken, that he is afraid of what that might mean. Again, he walks right up to the line. He could say, "I am dangerous." Instead, he lets her translate it into "I am damaged." She opens up even further, talks about her own trauma, reassures him that being hurt does not make him a monster. The door, he steps back through it and closes it behind him. These almost confessions function like pressure valves. Every time Dexter admits a sliver of darkness, addiction, childhood pain, emotional numbness, he vents just enough guilt to keep going. And Rita, hearing what sounds like hard-won honesty, feels like they are making progress. The relationship appears to deepen. In reality, the story he tells simply becomes more sophisticated, more resistant to being questioned. Over time, this becomes its own cycle of abuse. Tension builds as Dexter's lies pile up and his absences grow harder to explain. Then comes the partial release, a teary admission, an apology, a vague hint at something terrible in his past. Rita responds with renewed hope, with plans for marriage, for a baby, for a house away from Miami and the ghosts of Metro homicide. And then the secrecy returns, a fresh round of distance and late nights that she dutifully tries to understand. This is the story of a woman who thinks she is slowly being trusted with her partner's deepest self, when in fact she is being trained to accept less and call it intimacy. And the next time Dexter flirts with the truth, the stakes for both of them are going to be even higher. And the show does something quietly cruel with that. It turns Rita into our mirror. Because as Dexter's lies start to stack up, her questions are the ones you have already been asking in your head. Why is he out so late? Why does he look like he has been somewhere else entirely when he's standing right in front of her? Why does a man who claims to love his family always seem to be sprinting away from them? We are going to bend. On its own, it is just an odd detail, another strange thing in a life that has had too many strange things already. But you start to see how dangerous it is when you remember what that shoe means in the larger story. It is physical evidence that Dexter manipulates crime scenes and people. Rita is holding a piece of the case file the audience already understands, and she chooses to put it back down. Again and again, the show uses her perspective to stage near capture scenarios. She walks into the room just after Dexter has hidden something. She overhears a fragment of a tense phone call with someone from Miami Metro and accepts the first half plausible excuse. She notices blood on his clothes and believes the story about a crime scene that ran late. Each of these is a moment where any other character might start an investigation. Rita starts a conversation, and Dexter ends it. When you lay them all out together, you start to see that this is not bad luck. It is structure. Rita is positioned as an internal detective who never gets the full file, a woman whose instincts are accurate, but whose life has taught her not to trust them. Every time she almost connects the dots, someone, Dexter, her mother, even Deborah, gently nudges her away. Settle in, get comfortable, because the next step is even harsher. The closer Rita gets to a real, stable future, the more the series threads Dexter's near exposure through her happiest plans, until the day her almost realizations stop being near misses and turn into something permanent. And the cruel part is that the danger doesn't arrive with sirens or flashing lights. It arrives as a drawer handle, a cardboard box, a phone ringing in the next room. This is the story of how Rita's kitchen, bedroom, and hallway slowly turn into the quietest crime scenes in Miami, without her ever realizing she is living inside the tape. We are going to sit for a moment with those small, physical borders Dexter Morgan builds into the house. The drawer he does not want opened, the box he keeps just out of reach, the phone calls he steps away to take, lowering his voice, angling his body so she cannot see his face. On the surface, these are ordinary gestures of privacy. But when you lay them all out together, you start to see a pattern, rehearsed evasions that carve the home into safe and unsafe zones. Rita moves through those zones the way anyone would. She tidies, she looks for batteries, or a pen, or a spare charger. She hears a phone ringing and answers, because that is what people do when they share a life. The tragedy is that her natural curiosity is not suspicious. It is domestic. She is not snooping. She is cleaning. She is not investigating. She is helping. And yet every time she opens the wrong drawer or reaches for the wrong box, the series frames it like she is about to step onto a blood spatter field. Watch how often the camera gets there before she does. It lingers on the drawer front as her hand comes into frame. It cuts to Dexter, watching from across the room, his pleasant mask slipping for half a second as he calculates how fast he can cross the distance. A phone vibrates on the counter, and we sit with it for a beat, too long, before Rita's fingers close around it. The audience is invited to hold its breath as grocery lists, kids' homework, and chore charts brush up against lethal secrets that are never more than an arm's length away. Over time, these near breaches turn the shared home into a kind of battlefield of access and denial. Her from discovering the truth also keep her trapped inside Dexter's version of it, until the walls of that house stop being a refuge and become the final perimeter she will never escape. Those walls only work as a perimeter because of what Rita has already taught herself to live with. Long before Dexter Morgan turns that house into camouflage, Rita has been quietly revising the definition of what a good man looks like. After Paul, the bar does not just lower, it drops through the floor. We are going to remember that when we first meet her, she is still flinching from slammed doors and raised voices, still organizing her life around not provoking rage. In that post-Paul mindset, a night without screaming is a gift. A weekend without bruises is almost romantic. Safety is not a baseline, it is a luxury item she assumes she cannot really afford. So when Dexter arrives, soft-spoken, careful, almost apologetic about his own distance, you start to see the trap forming. He does not hit her. He does not yell. He shows up with donuts, with a gentle smile, with a willingness to fix a faucet or watch a movie without demanding anything in return. And every moment of that lands for Rita as exceptional, because the comparison running in the background is a man who broke her ribs and blamed her for it. This is the story of how minimal effort becomes framed as extraordinary devotion. Dexter is good with Astor and Cody in the narrow way he knows how to be. Games in the yard, a trip on the boat, calm patience when they act out. He does not use drugs. He has a stable job at Miami Metro Homicide. He remembers school events often enough to seem engaged. On paper, that looks like a miracle. In practice, it is the bare minimum of responsible adulthood. But Rita's history has trained her to see it as more than she deserves. Listen to the way she talks about him in those early seasons. When her mother suggests she should want more, Rita defends Dexter, as if wanting passion or shared dreams would be greedy. She tells herself that stability is what matters, that fireworks are for people who have not already used up their share of luck. When Dexter disappears, she calls it work. When he lies about addiction, she folds her own needs smaller and decides that supporting his recovery is the only dream she should have. And this is where the danger sharpens, because when you lay them all out together, every broken date, every vague excuse, every late-night absence, the pattern is obvious. But from Rita's vantage point, the question is never, is this man hiding a double life? It is, who am I to ask for more when he is kind to my kids and does not hurt me? The lower that standard sinks, the safer Dexter's mask becomes. His ongoing deception does not have to be convincing. It only has to be slightly better than the terror that came before. Now, let's follow what happens when the world starts rewarding that shrinking, and everyone around her calls it happiness. The lower that standard sinks, the safer Dexter's mask becomes. His ongoing deception does not have to be extraordinary. It only has to be slightly better than the terror that came before. And that before has a name and a face and a mother standing in the kitchen telling Rita to give him one more chance. This is the story of how 3 generations quietly train Rita to carry damage that is not hers. We are going to move back for a moment to those early scenes where her mother visits. Has done its work. Rita has been taught that her value lies in how well she can keep a man on track. So when Dexter frames his interest as "you're good for me," it lands as a compliment instead of a warning. It sounds like redemption. He is not saying, "I am dangerous." He is saying, "You fix me." And because she has been told her whole life that fixing men is what love looks like, she leans toward it instead of away. The series quietly reinforces this pattern in the way other people talk to her about Dexter. When he disappears, when he is emotionally vacant, when his stories do not quite line up, the advice is never, "What do you need?" It is, "Be patient with him. He has been through a lot. He has issues. Let's give him time." Rita is encouraged to be understanding of a man whose inner life she is never actually allowed to see, as though her empathy is a tool for keeping him functional rather than a need she might have for herself. And when you lay them all out together, you start to see a lineage rather than a coincidence. A mother who tells her to stay, an ex-husband whose abuse becomes her responsibility to manage, a boyfriend, then husband, whose secrets are buffered by her endless willingness to absorb confusion, fear, and disappointment, so he can keep moving through the world untouched. This is not just Rita being too nice. It is a generational script that says the men must keep functioning, no matter the cost, and the women will quietly pay the bill. Settle in, get comfortable, because that bill is about to come due in the most literal way possible. That bill is not abstract. It is paid in dishes, in bedtime stories, in the quiet way Rita bends her entire schedule around a man who is almost never really there. In the daytime story of Dexter Morgan, we are going to watch her doing what looks like ordinary family work, while the night story turns all of that work into camouflage. On the surface, the tasks are simple, even comforting. Rita gets the kids up for school, packs lunches, handles homework, she cooks dinner, cleans the kitchen, folds the laundry that never seems to end. She is the one who sits on the floor with Astor when she has nightmares about Paul, who keeps Cody from blaming himself for anything that goes wrong, who rocks Harrison at 3 a.m., while Dexter is working late at Miami Metro Homicide. When Paul shows up, drunk or furious or manipulative, Rita manages the drama, calls the lawyer, files the paperwork. The series presents this as her default setting, the way things naturally are. But that is not the whole story, because layered on top of the visible work is a second, invisible shift that belongs entirely to Dexter's mask. Rita is the one who smooths over his absences, who tells the kids Daddy had to help catch a bad guy, who laughs off missed recitals and late arrivals as the price of important work. She absorbs the sting of being stood up, then edits her own disappointment down into something small and palatable so he does not feel pressured to change. Every close call has a domestic echo. While Dexter is out stalking a suspect or disposing of a body, Rita is answering questions at the door, hosting barbecues, showing up to family events so no one notices how often he disappears. When you lay them all out together, you start to see that she is not just keeping a household running, she is maintaining an alibi in real time, stitching a continuous line of normalcy that protects him from suspicion. This labor keeps the illusion intact on two levels. In universe, it makes Dexter look nature, her role as the nurturing survivor who is just grateful for a nice guy. That framing is its own kind of erasure, and in the next part of this story, we're going to see how completely it sets her up for the final, irreversible loss. That erasure does something else, too. It makes Rita almost invisible at the exact moments when she is standing closest to the truth, asking questions that sound a lot like the ones Debra is asking at Miami Metro Homicide, just with less authority and no badge to back them up. Now, let's lay those moments side by side. Deb is in the squad room, pacing in front of a whiteboard covered in photos and red ink, trying to understand how the ice truck killer seems to know Dexter, why the crime scenes feel personal. At the same time, Rita is in a small kitchen, reheating dinner, asking Dexter why he missed Astor's recital, why his phone was off, why his eyes look like he is somewhere else entirely. Different rooms, same unease. In season 1, Deb is professionally closing in on a killer, but she does not know it is her brother. She digs into patterns, alibis, time of death. She leans on Dexter for insight, and he gives her technical language, procedural talk, the comfort of expertise. Meanwhile, Rita is personally closing in on Dexter's inconsistencies at home, noticing how late night work always seems to arrive when something awful happens in Miami. She does not have a case file. She has a half-eaten dinner table and 2 kids asking where Dexter is. When you lay them all out together, you start to see the overlap. Deb asks where Dexter was when a body was dumped. Rita asks where he was when Cody's school play started. Deb pushes on why he seems numb around brutal crime scenes. Rita pushes on why he seems numb around intimacy, why he shuts down after moments that should bring him closer to her. Both women are circling the same void, the same emotional unavailability that is not just trauma, not just stress, but the mask of a man who kills at night. Dexter adapts to each of them with surgical precision. With Deb, he leans into the role of the brilliant analyst, using blood-spatter terms, timelines, and plausible forensic limitations to redirect her away from him and toward some other suspect. With Rita, he leans into emotional half-truths, a story about a difficult childhood, a vague confession of addiction, an apology wrapped in affection and domestic gestures. This is the story of one man running two simultaneous cover operations, one in the bullpen and one in the bedroom. That dual pressure creates some of the series' tightest near-miss tension. We are going to watch Dexter walk out of an interrogation with Deb, barely keeping his story straight, only to walk into a living room where Rita is holding a baby and a question he cannot afford to answer honestly. And the quiet irony is that Rita, without training, without institutional power, is unknowingly playing a parallel role to the detective who is literally trained to catch men like Dexter Morgan. Settle in, get comfortable, because in the next part, we will see what happens when that pressure finally shifts from suspicion to consequence. That pressure has to go somewhere, and in this part of the story, it flows straight into a velvet box and a carefully rehearsed speech about love, family, and the future. On the surface, the build-up to Dexter's proposal is framed as healing. We watch Morgan move from the detached boyfriend who picked Rita precisely when anyone wants to imagine as the Bay Harbor butcher. Marriage does not just soften Dexter's image, it hardens his alibi. Every close call, every near miss, every moment the mask almost slips, now has a built-in explanation. If Dexter is late, he is a stressed new father. If he looks tired, he is up with Harrison. If he disappears, well, work at homicide is demanding, and providing for a family takes time. The ring on his finger and the baby in his arms do the talking for him long before anyone thinks to ask a real question. We are going to see, again and again, how that domestic tableau buys him benefit of the doubt that a single man would never receive. For Rita, though, the proposal lands in a completely different register. This is not about cover. It is about finally being chosen. After Paul, after her mother's criticism, after years of feeling like damaged goods, Dexter on one knee reads as proof that she is worthy of stability. She hears a promise that the chaos is over, that this man will not leave, that the kids will grow up in a safe, ordinary home. The irony is quiet, but brutal. The same gesture that tells her she is no longer collateral in someone else's violence is, in practice, locking her into that role more tightly than ever. Because once Dexter becomes her husband, Rita is no longer just a girlfriend he can walk away from. She is woven into his cover story at every level: joint finances, shared address, legal next of kin. Leaving him, questioning him too deeply, or even just noticing the wrong pattern now threatens not only her heart, but her entire sense of security. The show plays this softly, with wedding planning and baby photos, but underneath, the stakes are shifting. The ring is not only a symbol of commitment, it is a narrative device that makes Dexter harder to catch and Rita harder to free. And as the seasons move forward, that quiet trade-off will become more and more visible, especially when the violence outside their front door finally finds its way in. If you go back to Rita's very first scenes and really sit with them, you start to see a different show trying to emerge. This is the story of a woman who has already survived one predator. She is doing the slow, unglamorous work of building a life that belongs to her. We watch her set boundaries with Paul, not in one dramatic courtroom speech, but in a series of quiet, exhausted decisions, supervised visits. Changing locks, refusing to let him rewrite what he did to her. We see her juggle shifts, search for work, and figure out how to parent Astor and Cody on her own. In those early episodes, when you lay them all out together, Rita is not just Dexter's cover. She is a protagonist in her own right, with goals, obstacles, and a fragile sense of hope. Then, the camera begins to turn, slowly at first. A conversation about Paul's latest stunt becomes a chance to show how well Dexter lies. A scene of Rita worrying over money doubles as an alibi for why Morgan can disappear at night. Her therapy, her attempts to trust again, are framed as Dexter's progress at pretending to be normal. Her inner life starts to be translated into his character development. By the time they buy the new house, the reframing is almost complete. For Rita, it is a milestone, a stable home after years of chaos, a place where her kids can sleep without listening for shouting. For the series, it is immediately coded as a new risk profile for Dexter. More rooms to sneak out of, more neighbors who might notice something, more evidence he will have to hide if Miami Metro homicide ever closes in. She is a symbol of consequence. A visual shorthand for innocent lives in the blast radius whenever a close call tightens around Dexter. Settle in, get comfortable with that idea, because the series will return to it every time the mask slips, right up to the night the violence finally steps over her threshold and does not leave. Because once you accept Rita as that symbol, the series does something almost cruel. It lets her be happy. Not loudly, not in a triumphant way, but in those small, ordinary scenes where you start to see a woman who genuinely believes the worst is behind her. Late in the series, you watch her in the kitchen, planning a bigger house, talking about schools, wondering aloud what kind of father Dexter will be as Harrison grows up. She folds laundry on the couch while Morgan stands in the doorway. And she smiles in a way we did not see in season 1, when every conversation was shadowed by Paul and court dates and bruises that had not fully faded. This is the story of someone who thinks she has finally stepped out of the blast radius. The show leans into that feeling. The lighting goes soft, golden, almost hazy around the edges. The music turns gentle, domestic, the kind of unobtrusive score you could fall asleep to. We are going to spend whole stretches in that warmth. Rita and Dexter at the dinner table, Rita cradling the baby, Rita talking about vacations they might take once things calm down at Miami Metro homicide. For a few minutes at a time, the series almost invites you to forget what kind of story you are, but Dexter does not forget. His internal monologue keeps slipping in at the edges of these scenes, a quiet counterpoint that never quite matches her optimism. She says, "I finally feel safe," and we hear him think about how useful that safety is as a cover. She imagines barbecues and anniversaries, and he is cataloging Trinity's patterns, wondering how much blood he can keep off the children's clothes. The mask is smiling, the voiceover is not. There is a dry irony in how often his narration undercuts the mood without ever breaking it. He calls Rita his perfect cover, even as she talks about him as her second chance. He frames his absences as a struggle with work or a relapse into a fake addiction, while the camera holds on her relieved face, grateful that he is being honest now. The tone stays tender, but the words, if you listen closely, are made of glass. And when you lay them all out together, these calm evenings and soft focus mornings, you start to see the shape of the trap. The more secure Rita feels, the more deeply she roots herself and the children into Dexter's life, the more impossible it becomes for her to step away when the danger finally surfaces. Every peaceful moment becomes a kind of countdown. Every kiss at the doorway, another tick on a clock, you can hear, but she cannot. Now, let's stay with that dissonance a little longer, because the night it runs out, the horror will not be that violence arrives, but that it arrives in the middle of her happiest day. Because the real twist is not Trinity in the bathtub. It is the moment you realize the series has been rehearsing that image from the very beginning, quietly, patiently, while asking you to relax into the fantasy that Rita is the one person in Dexter Morgan's orbit who is safe. From the pilot, the show tells you otherwise. Dexter's narration frames her as perfect cover, damaged, gentle, grateful for the bear spliced together. Domestic softness on one track, escalating predator on the other. And the series keeps staging Dexter's near captures, right beside Rita's most vulnerable moments. When Doakes starts tailing him, Dexter responds by faking a drug addiction. Rita finds the evidence, confronts him through tears, and we are invited to focus on his performance of shame rather than the fact that her reality is being rewritten in real time. His operational risk and her emotional exposure rise in perfect parallel. The closer Miami Metro gets to the Bay Harbor butcher, the more Rita talks about the future, about marriage, about stability. Every close call for him is a confession she never receives. This is the story of misdirection, done with throw pillows and baby showers. Calm, domestic scenes become a kind of visual lullaby. We are going to watch birthday parties, house hunting, a wedding on a sunny day, and the editing will place them right up against crime scenes and stakeouts. The contrast is soothing. It tells you that what happens at night is one story, and what happens in Rita's kitchen is another. But that division is the illusion. The same man stands in both frames. When you lay them all out together, you start to see that Rita was never background. She is the cost column on every decision Dexter makes. Paul goes back to prison, so Dexter's mask stays intact. Rita forgives an addiction that does not exist, so he can keep killing. She builds a life on the far side of his lies, and the show lets you drift along with her, right up until the bill comes. In the next part, let's sit with that cost, and how the series chooses the exact moment to finally cash it in. And the series really does cash it in. Not with a quiet breakup, not with Rita slowly drifting away, but with the most brutal kind of accounting. A body in a bathtub, a crying baby, and Dexter Morgan arriving just a few minutes too late. Structurally, the timing is almost cruel. By the end of season 4, every pillar of Dexter's double life is splintering at once. Doakes is gone, but LaGuardia's long memory still hangs over Miami Metro homicide. The Bay Harbor butcher case has been solved, yet the pattern of a forensically skilled insider with a boat has not actually changed. Trinity is active, Deborah is circling Dexter's past, and his lies to Rita are stacking up so quickly that even she begins to feel the distance. This is the moment when you lay them all out together and you start to see something. The life Dexter built around Rita is no longer sustainable as a cover or as a marriage. On paper, Trinity kills Rita. In the story, her death solves a problem the show has been quietly tightening for an entire season. Every late night, every mysterious trip, every time Dexter chooses a kill over a conversation, he is pushing the marriage toward questions he cannot answer. Why is he gone so often? Why does danger follow him? Why does the man who was supposed to be safe feel increasingly unknowable? The closer Rita gets to asking those questions clearly, the closer the series moves her toward that bathtub. The discovery itself is framed as a mirror. We are going to remember the origin image, a small boy in a pool of blood, his mother's body dismembered around him. Now, let's look at what the finale gives you. Harrison crying on the bathroom floor, Rita's blood soaking his clothes, Dexter standing in the doorway, seeing his own trauma perfectly recreated. This is the story of a cycle being rebooted. The series is not just killing a character, it is start to see an even sharper pattern. Doakes closes in, and Dexter leans harder on Rita as an alibi. The Bay Harbor butcher investigation heats up, and he proposes, folds himself deeper into her life. Trinity exposes Dexter's hypocrisy, and instead of stepping back, Dexter drags Rita into a new house, a new baby, a new future that he cannot possibly inhabit honestly. Every time he slips the noose, the tension has to go somewhere. The series chooses to vent it through. Settle in. Get comfortable with that thought for a second, because it is the hinge of the whole tragedy. Dexter survives by letting the universe balance his near misses on Rita's back. In the next section, we are going to sit with what that means for her story, and how the show almost dares you to accept her death as necessary so that his can be postponed. Because that is the part the series almost whispers instead of saying out loud. Rita begins as a woman trying to rebuild a life, and ends as a convenient place for the narrative to store consequences. This is the story of how a survivor with boundaries and needs is slowly rewritten into a sacrifice that keeps Dexter Morgan's story moving. When we first meet her, Rita is not just a prop in Miami. She is a woman who has survived Paul's violence, who is exhausted and frightened, and still somehow drawing lines. No sex yet, no shouting in front of the kids, no more second chances for Paul. She is in court, she is talking to lawyers, she is trying to hold on to Astor and Cody, and to a fragile sense that maybe, if she is careful enough, a gentle life is still possible. And Dexter chooses her precisely because of that. He says it plainly. Her trauma, her low expectations, her fear of conflict all make her unlikely to ask where he goes at night. On the surface, he is kind, patient, helpful with the children. Underneath, he is calculating how her boundaries can double as his mask. Every moment of healing she reaches for becomes, at the same time, an alibi he can use. Then the stripping begins, first through Paul, who keeps dragging her back into the old cycle, forcing her to defend herself in court and at home. Then through her mother, who arrives to tell her she is weak, that men always leave, that she should be grateful for whatever stability she can get. Each season takes a layer of autonomy and replaces it with pressure to keep the family together, to be understanding, to accept less than she needs. By the time Dexter is the one lying to her, the pattern is already set. He calls it a drug problem. Then work. Then stress. Rita pushes back, but notice how narrow her choices have become. Forgive him or blow up the life she has painstakingly built. Question him too hard, and she risks becoming the hysterical woman everyone around her has trained her not to be. So she adjusts, apologizes, caretakes. Meanwhile, the story quietly shifts. Her milestones become his beats. The house in the suburbs is a symbol of his attempt at normalcy. The baby is the test of whether Morgan can feel real attachment. The marriage is framed as his step toward humanity. We are going to Rita's doctor appointments, her wedding planning, her moving boxes, but the emotional camera is pointed at Dexter, measuring what each event does to his evolution. When you lay them all out together, you start to see the shape. This is not random tragedy. It is a slow conversion of Rita from person to plot. When you lay them all out together, the overlapping pressures on her are almost absurd. She is a single mother in Miami, working, budgeting, stretching every dollar, while Astor and Cody need school clothes and lunches and some sense that the world is safe. She is a trauma survivor, still carrying the bruises Paul left on her body and the deeper ones he left on her instincts. She has a critical mother who treats her like a failure, who reinforces the idea that she should be grateful for any man who is not actively hitting her. And then she has Dexter Morgan, a partner who looks perfect on paper and yet remains, in every important way, unreadable. That combination does something very specific. It makes her the perfect camouflage. Because of her history, Dexter explicitly chooses her in season 1 as someone whose expectations are low, whose standards for male behavior have been warped by violence and abandonment. She is predictable in the way the series needs. She will say yes to babysitting, yes to last-minute cancellations. Yes to the explanation that he has a drug problem or is just overworked at Miami Metro Homicide. She is grateful, non-demanding, easy to frame as lucky instead of exploited. The irony is dry and brutal. On the surface, everyone tells Rita she has won. She escaped Paul. She found a man who cooks, who shows up, who seems endlessly patient. The camera reinforces it with soft light and domestic scenes, using her kitchen and backyard as visual proof that Dexter's double life can coexist with something wholesome. But if you look at the pattern, you start to see that this supposed safety is built on omissions, evasions, and carefully timed lies. And this is where the meta level comes in. Rita quietly absorbs the moral cost of keeping Dexter sympathetic. The series lets you enjoy every near capture, every close call at work, because his home life appears to be flourishing. When Doakes closes in, when the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation tightens, the cross-cutting to Rita planning a wedding or a vacation tells you that Dexter has something real to lose, that he is a family man first and a killer second. Her presence is the ethical buffer that makes his survival feel like a relief instead of an atrocity. This is the story of a woman whose suffering is constantly repurposed as character development for someone else. Settle in, get comfortable with that idea for a moment, and it becomes harder to laugh off the title as a dark joke. It really does suck to be Rita Morgan in this universe, systematically, structurally, by design. In the next section, we're going to follow that design to its end and watch how the series cashes out all of that accumulated unfairness in a single, unforgettable image. Once you start looking at Rita through that lens, you start to see something uncomfortably familiar. This is not just the story of a woman unlucky enough to marry Dexter Morgan. It is the story of how someone can be surrounded by people telling her she is so lucky, while every quiet moment alone feels vaguely wrong, slightly off, like a room where the furniture has been moved half an inch. Rita's constant self-doubt is not random characterization. It mirrors what gaslighting looks like when it is woven into daily life instead of shouted in a single dramatic scene. Her mother tells her she picks the wrong men. Paul insists she is overreacting about the abuse. Miami Metro colleagues praise Dexter as the perfect boyfriend. Even Dexter frames his own lies as him being damaged, of a warning sign. That is another quiet red flag. When your tiredness is admired more than it is relieved. When people praise your strength but never adjust their own behavior, so you do not have to be strong all the time. Rita is constantly doing the emotional labor of smoothing over Dexter's absences, managing the children's expectations, absorbing Paul's chaos, and still being the calm center of the home. The show frames it as resilience. We can also name it as normalization. So what do you do with that in your own life? You do not need a serial killer in the kitchen for this to matter. Instead, you can start with small, non-sensational questions. When something feels off, do the explanations you are given actually reduce your anxiety, or do they just postpone it? If you wrote down every excuse, every broken promise, every "I'm just busy," what pattern would emerge? When you lay them all out together, would the story you have been told match the story you are living? We are going to sit with one more question, because it is the one Rita never gets to ask out loud. Are you present in this relationship as a person or as a solution? Once you notice that difference, it becomes frighteningly easy to see how someone like Rita can become the perfect cover story for someone like Dexter without ever being shown the script she is acting from. And that is where we are going to leave Rita Morgan. Not as a jump scare in a bathtub, not as a tragic epilogue to a tense season, but as the clearest example this series gives us of what it costs to stand next to someone else's carefully managed chaos. because Rita is not just Dexter's cover. She is the proof that every complex protagonist is standing on something or someone. Every secret night at the marina, every body wrapped in plastic, every narrow escape at Miami Metro homicide is quietly balanced by a woman who thinks she is finally safe, finally loved, finally done paying for other people's damage. The story keeps asking whether Dexter will be caught. It rarely pauses to ask what it is doing to the person who keeps making his freedom look normal. When you lay them all out together, you start to see it. Rita surviving Paul. Rita apologizing to her mother. Rita believing Dexter's made up addictions and late nights and sudden absences. While Morgan is out hunting the ice truck killer, she is filling out custody paperwork. While Doakes is circling closer, she is planning a wedding. While Trinity is moving toward their house, she is decorating a nursery. The line between supportive partner and human shield gets thinner every season, and she never gets to read the script that explains why she is so tired. So if you ever rewatch Dexter, or any anti-hero story like it, let's keep Rita in the frame a little longer than the camera does. Every time the lead scrambles to hide a body, ask whose weekend just got rearranged so the alibi works. Every time the mask almost slips at work, look at who smiles in the background and makes the scene feel ordinary. The more we track the labor that keeps the double life standing, the harder it becomes to pretend that collateral damage is just an unfortunate twist. And then, quietly, bring it closer. Where in your own life are you playing the stabilizer, the caretaker, the camouflage? Where are you smoothing over someone else's volatility, taking their word